Good evening. I am so pleased. This is our third and final class of our Hoffman University EIW with our collaboration with Emerald City's Construction Estimating Series. Our first class was focused on civil construction estimating, and we have quite a bit of content, quite a bit of material that we will be sharing with all of you. Our second class was structural construction estimating. And again, in the civil environment, you're typically working around the site plan. You are typically working around dirt, and you are importing, exporting materials around the site. You are really focusing on the grade and where the structure will begin. So from the footing all the way to the tip of the structure. This is a part of the this is obviously a part of the civil construction environment, and these are what you will expect as you proceed. Forgive us as we are going through just making sure to get our digital file of the PowerPoint loaded on Zoom. And so we are doing that right now. We have converted our technology over from a direct cable to the Chromecast system. So we can get mad at Google for that, but it looks like we're up and running, and we will again restart our presentation from the beginning. As I mentioned to you, we had the civil construction series in the beginning, which was our first class. Our second class was on structural, which really gets into the outer shell of the structure, whether that structure be made out of steel, concrete, masonry, or other materials. And finally, this to me is one of the most exciting parts of our construction estimating series. It's the architectural piece. This is the piece that really embraces those folks that are involved in the project at the tail end of the project. They're the ones that are really engaged in putting the finishing touches on a project, whether it be flooring, whether it be paint, whether it be ceiling finishes, or some of the wood finishes around the doors and windows and interior relights. This is what this series is about. The Entrepreneurial Institute of Washington, in partnership with Hoffman and Construction, is really focused on making sure that we introduce you to the best practices around construction estimating in these various elements. For those of you who are not here physically, we want to make sure that you know that the facility that we're performing these classes are in a COVID compliant facility. That is, everyone that comes into this facility is tested and signed in. And so we make sure that we're trying to minimize any exposure to your businesses and employees. We are going to have, as we have in the previous classes, they are going to be instructed by Bjork, who is the chief estimator for Hoffman Construction. We also have our sponsor and contributor, Dave Johnson, here also with us, who is the vice president of Hoffman Construction. Again, I will facilitate this class. And then we have our strategic partner, Steve Gelb with Emerald Cities. And we want to thank him for his work with Emerald Cities and for the food and beverages that he has provided for our classes. Today, our agenda will be really focused around these points. And so I'm going to introduce you to our really talented team panel here today. I'm going to go over our objectives. We're going to go over takeoff techniques. We're also going to go over specific elements that are engaged as you start developing your takeoff, as you are starting to quantify those elements that need to be quantified in order to make sure that you cover all the bases in your construction estimate. We're also going to be providing you pricing considerations, and at the tail end of this presentation, will allow you to engage in questions, and we will conclude this class. Those of you that are participating on the class via Zoom, we're going to encourage you to raise your hand and type up the question that you may have for our panelists, and we will have someone here present that question to our panelists so that can be presented to all of you. I'm going to take a quick break. We've got a lot of feedback from you guys, so I just want to make sure we're okay to continue. Coop, we're okay to continue? I'm getting a lot of conversation going on over there. Okay. First, I would like to introduce all of you to Dave Johnson, who is, as I mentioned, the Vice President of Hoffman Construction. He's working on 3 decades with Hoffman Construction. He has been a personal mentor to me within my work within the Entrepreneurial Institute of Washington, as well as my work leading Platinum Group, a minority business inclusion and construction management firm. Without the engagement and support of Hoffman, I know we wouldn't be where we're at today. I can tell you that the work that Dave has been involved in has been very high caliber, high profile work, and we're really blessed to be able to have someone like himself to be able to share his experiences in these very complex projects, so we can learn these best practices and apply them to our businesses. So let's give a warm welcome to Dave Johnson with Hoffman Construction.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate the opportunity and the support you've given us for these programs and helping us to develop a rich series of estimating programs for people to learn and get better at in the construction trades. We're very passionate about trying to help folks grow and be successful and figure out how we can get more folks growing up on our projects so they can be doing more and better things as they work through the construction industry. So appreciate the time and effort that you've put into putting this together, and appreciate the support of Tabor 100 and Steve Gelb with the Emerald Cities so to help us put these things on. So hope we can provide some very good content and help people get better in the business today. So thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Next, I'd like to bring Steve Gelb with Emerald Cities, who's been responsible for not only creating the Zoom digital webinar environment that you all are participating in, but also who sponsored the food and created the environment for this to be a successful program. He has been highly involved in creating opportunities for our businesses, both working with nonprofits and some of the large corporations within the Northwest. And he has a vision of creating inclusion, not only for our workforce, but for our businesses. So let's give a warm welcome to Steve Gelb.
Thanks, and welcome everyone to this third in our series of estimating webinars. And sessions. And this is part of our e-contractor academy focus. We run a full 7-week program in the fall, and this is a follow-up to that. We also want to let you know that we work with Dan Seidel and Platinum Group to advise and coach the participants to help them work through and grow their businesses. So we're very happy to participate and really appreciate Hoffman's support and Platinum Group's support. And now I'm going to give Dan the microphone back, but I'm going to launch a quick poll, just 3 questions asking you where you're from and what trades you work in, and ask you for some demographic information that helps us with our project planning. And apologize in advance, you'll see there's a typo on one of the questions, but I think you'll figure it out.
Thank you, Steve. A nice haircut, by the way. Nice that he finishes up our program with a nice smooth haircut. And finally, I'm Dan Seidel. I've been blessed to be engaged in government contracting for 3 decades. I started in the actually in 1991. I guess this is the 30-year mark, and was blessed to work with the general contractor who became award-winning. And you know, that experience really launched my inspiration to really be able to help others and grow their businesses. And so, you know, we've been able to grow the Entrepreneurial Institute of Washington and have actually an international presence. These videos will be shared with you and the world on our Hoffman University EIW Contractor University YouTube station. But enough about me and enough about EIW. Let's get to our main speaker. Chris Bjork has led this construction estimating series from day one. Actually, the first time we launched our estimating series, which was really focused on estimating in a GCCM, General Contractor Construction Manager environment, it was Chris Bjork who led that class and helped develop a really robust curriculum that got us to where we're at today. And so I am so pleased to be able to introduce you all to Chris Bjork, a 25-year veteran with Hoffman Construction, and one who just really wants to ensure that our businesses grow and prosper and wants to fill those voids for our firms. And it looks like I'm getting a question over here, so I want to make sure I present that. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just want to share the results of the poll. You all should be able to see that, I believe. If you can't, I will read it out. We have 7 folks calling in from Washington State and 1 from California. Welcome. And then in the trades that are represented here, we have 2 in framing concrete and other structural, 2 in painting, finish work, 1 in earthwork and flat work, 1 in landscaping, 1 in site cleanup, 3 mechanical, 1 electrical, and 2 other. So very, very diverse group of contractors. We hope you will use this opportunity to learn more and branch out into other fields.
Thank you so much. And I think there may be a few registrars that maybe haven't completed their surveys. And so as those come in, we'll make sure to update you. But with no further ado, let's introduce Chris Bjork to the class. Thank you so much. Oh, what you got?
I got one. Hi, I'm Chris Bjork, and I'm the chief estimator for our Washington office at Hoffman Construction. Been doing this for 26 years. I've gotten to work on a lot of different types of projects. So hopefully I'm planning on bringing that experience to you to help you be able to increase your ability to do takeoffs and be more competitive and learn different trades. Tonight we're going to be focusing on architectural estimating, which is a really wide range. So we're going to cover a lot of topics, and without talking much more about it, I think we'll get in and get going on it. So our class objectives here, we're going to focus in on making sure that we understand the major architectural systems and their elements. We're going to identify items to take off. We're going to quantify scope and summarize those quantifications, quantities for pricing. And we're going to talk about the basic elements of pricing. First thing that we're going to start off about, we're going to look at this architectural estimating is like a building. We're going to start on the outside and we're going to work back in. So on the outside, we first look at our building enclosure systems. And the first of that is your facade systems. You have two types of facade systems. There's either an opaque system or it's windows. We're going to focus in first on the opaque surfaces. So these are assemblies. When we look at facade areas, we look at areas, square footage of wall surface, square footage of metal panel. Those are the main elements. You will, as you get into the details, you'll see some elements that are more lineal footages. You might have some trim pieces, some specific elements that are more of take off more of a lineal footage nature. But for the general bulk of this, you're dealing with areas. And then you're looking at assemblies. So here's a sample assembly, and you can think of this as two different pieces that you're going to look at. There's an exterior wall assembly, and then there's the facade assembly. We look at those two different ways because those are typically two different contractors that are going to do that work. The dividing line between that in a modern building is the water-air barrier. So that's a membrane surface or a peel and stick surface that you put down that is actually the waterproofing of the building. And that scope of work can go in either direction depending on how it's contracted out and what makes sense for the project. First, we're going to start off looking at just the exterior wall assembly. So when we look at exterior wall assemblies, that's going to include your interior drywall. It's going to include your studs and exterior insulation. It's also going to include your outside, the outside face, your gypsum sheathing. And it may include the water air barrier as well. But for the wall itself, when you take the walls off, you go right through punched openings. So don't worry about taking out that area that's up for a punched opening or a door opening. There's added cost framing those openings out. And what we found over typical experience is that the cost for actually going through and itemizing all those all that extra framing, the extra jam studs, the extra header studs, the sill studs, and then deducting out the drywall and what's not there, it ends up being about a wash for cost. Now, I will clarify that if you are doing this as a self-perform, so you're actually doing the framing, you're going to want to get into those details because as a general contractor, I don't actually do the drywall framing. We subcontract that out, so I look at it a little bit more higher level. But as you get into an actual detailed takeoff, very similar if you saw last week to how we look at concrete construction and the details that go in that, you will need to dive into more details and look at those, the jams and how many extra studs you need for jams and headers. But you take that off and it's great because 1 square footage will get you the same square footage for all the different pieces of the assembly. And you move out to the opaque, the facade surface, and that's going to include elements like your continuous insulation. It'll include the facade, any kind of framing systems to support that facade system and the facade system itself. Here we do take out for openings because you don't want to put metal panel where there's a window. That's cost money and it will drive up your costs and you'll have more money in it than you should in your bid. So we do look at that and frame out those windows and really look at the finishes once we get out to that facade surface. Now, what types of facade surfaces can you have? Well, you can have metal panels. You can have brick, masonry, stone, precast. You can have wood siding. There's a number of different types of systems that you can put on the building. In fact, one project we had over in Pullman on the art museum over at Wazoo, we actually put specialty glazing as a rain screen. So that's instead of metal panel there, you had actually pieces of glass that were framed off the building. And it was a special color and specially designed system. Looks really cool. But there's all sorts of different systems. You'll also find stucco systems. You don't see EIFS around here in the Seattle area often, but in other parts of the country that are more drier, not prone to the amounts of rain and moisture that we get here, you will see that an EIFS system, or sometimes it's a DEIF system, DEIFS system, that is a similar system. It's a stucco type system that's more panelized. Most all of these things take off the same way. It's just a matter of what do you have on the outside and substituting different areas. There's usually some differences in thicknesses and things, but that's more of a design issue and not necessarily a contracting issue. The next portion that we need to talk to, once we've talked about the opaque surfaces, is the window surfaces. Now, there's a number of different types of window systems. You can have a punched opening, which is your standard, I've got one window and there's repeated throughout the building. You see that in the classic brick building. You see the same window repeated over and over again. There's storefront assemblies. So storefront assemblies are your entrances. They're what you see typically on a retail space. They're typically no more than 12 feet high, because on a storefront assembly, if you go over 12 feet high, you need to add steel into that to support it, because it's not designed to take the same floor to floor, span the same floor to floor heights. You also have window wall and curtain wall, and the difference between the two is window wall will span from the floor surface to the bottom of the ceiling. So if you're looking at a high-rise building, it will be out on the edge and it will span from slab to slab. And then over the slab edge, you'll have another flashing piece that'll go wrap around that to cover that piece. Curtain wall is different. It spans on the outside of the building and goes and spans the whole way. It's clipped back to the structure at every floor. And that's how it works differently. It's usually a thicker mullion. So curtain wall may have a 7.5 or 9.5 inch mullion, whereas a storefront may have a 4.5 inch mullion, and a window wall will be somewhere in between. The other thing to think about with windows is that entrances. So doors, aluminum doors in let's say an aluminum window system, you take those off with the window, with the windows itself, not as a separate activity, because the subcontractor who supplies the windows and the storefronts will supply those doors as well. They do both of them, and it's one complete system that you look at. So for as far as when you're taking this off, areas for windows, we want to know what that area of the window system is. And we're also going to look at each counts for the doors. Now, you need to understand that there's different types of glazing. And we need to account for those different types of glazing when you do your takeoffs. So you're going to have more than one area. And there's a couple different ways that you can look at this. So you can either look at it as each type of area and take off your spandrel glass, which is a opaque glass, or sometimes there's even metal panel that they'll frame into a window system, a curtain wall system. One project that we did, we actually framed terracotta, which is a clay type masonry system, into a curtain wall system. You can have different systems in there, so you need to quantify those different areas differently to make sure that you account for the right pricing on them. How I typically do it is I take off the whole system and say, here's my curtain wall system, and it is 5,000 square feet. And I'm assuming that curtain wall system is just your basic vision glass, clear glass that there. But then I'm going to take off, okay, well, I've got 1,000 square feet of spandrel panel. And I'll include that as a premium. So spandrel panel may cost $5 to $10 more than a clear glass panel. So I take those off as premiums, metal panel in the curtain wall. Is it laminate or bulletproof glass? Looking at those things and treating them as premiums is oftentimes an easier way to go, because then you don't have to divide up the glass at quite as much and run the risk of missing a few pieces areas. You can look at the whole systems holistically, and then add premiums for those more specific elements. So this system of taking off the exterior one, since we're on glass right there, you take off interior storefronts and interior glazing the same way. I'm not going to necessarily talk about it much once we get to the interiors, because this technique works for exterior, interior. Just know that they're two different systems, because an interior glazing system does not have to have the same level of waterproofing because it's inside. Then we have all the different little pieces. So the miscellaneous items in a facade takeoff are going to include flashings. And when I talk flashings here, I'm not talking, if you have a metal panel system, the trim pieces on the edge of the flashing. Those trim pieces on the edge of a metal panel are part of the metal panel system, and you don't need to worry about that in as much detail. But when you have transitions between the two different types of materials, brick to metal panel, brick to window, metal panel to window, you will have flashings like a sill flashing here that accounts for this difference in thickness of the two different materials that you have. That is a separate, you need to understand that that is a separate piece, and that it's not included in either system. So typically flashings are going to be done by whoever's doing metal panels on the project, but you need to look at those as lineal footages. Sometimes they'll be each counts, sometimes they'll be square footages. You have to look at you're going to really have to look at those specific things. Is it a scupper, like a hole through the wall that's got that for water to get out through a parapet? That will typically be an each count. You're going to look at that as an each count. Is it a sill flashing? That's a lineal footage. Is it a counter flashing on the back of a parapet wall that may be 2 feet tall? Well, there you want to talk about looking at it as a square footage there, because you've got an area to accommodate that you need to account for. Other items are caulking. When we look at caulking, is the type of caulking and lineal footages. And then the doors, frames, and hardwares on the exterior. So we're looking typically at hollow metal doors on the exterior of a building, but it also could include things like overhead coiling doors, or an overhead coiling grill at, say, if you were doing a light rail station, something that comes down that is still open air, but you need to have the client wants a barrier at nighttime when the system isn't operating. We look at these items as in each counts by the different size. So is it a 3 foot by 7 foot door? I've got a door, I've got a frame, I've got hardware associated with it. Is it an overhead coiling door? Is it a 10 by 12 coiling door? I've got 3 of those. I've got 6 10 by 14 overhead coiling doors. And you summarize those so that you can go get a quote to price that out. The other piece that you can find in there are louvers. So they're typically mechanical areas, but one thing to understand, and you'll need to look at your contract and your invitation to bid and the bidding instructions on, are they mechanical louvers? Because oftentimes if it's a strict mechanical louver, the mechanical contractor will have that in his scope. But if it is an architectural louver, then it will be in typically the metal panel scope. It'll be a separate scope, and oftentimes the mechanical contractor will exclude architectural louvers. But those are taken off just by area, the same way that you take off every other type of major elements of the facade. So moving on then from the vertical surfaces and now to the horizontal and the below grade surfaces, roofing and waterproofing. Start off with waterproofing. We look at waterproofing by area. But what is key is that you know what kind of waterproofing are you talking about. Damp proofing is a very inexpensive waterproofing system. You see that on the outsides of foundation walls, the little stem walls, like possibly like even like a house, where your foundation wall goes down below the ground. You want to put kind of a black tar surface on it to make sure that the moisture doesn't get in. But then you have cold applied systems, you have membrane systems, you have bentonite clay systems. It's important to understand what type of system you have because they all cost different things. this system here that you see, this is a PVC system that is you see on underground light rail stations. It is a extremely thorough system where you actually embed PVC strips into the concrete and then weld PVC sections into it. It also has a bentonite system associated with it as well. It's a belt and suspenders system that is definitely on the expensive side. But you need to understand what it is that you're dealing with it and what are the components, because it may have protection board on top of it. It may have rigid insulation to protect it. It may have a concrete slab for a horizontal system. It may have a concrete slab below it and above it in order to provide a nice smooth surface for it and a protection for it on top of it. You need to make sure that when you look at your bidding instructions that the concrete guy has the concrete, those slabs, the base slab and the protection slab. If they don't, it may be in your scope, because sometimes those items are actually spec'd out in the waterproofing specification. So it may be someplace where you need to ask the question. And certainly, even if it's in the concrete spec, you need to understand how that coordination is going to work, because they have to form a concrete slab. And if you've run your waterproofing slab well past where they can form, they're going to have the concrete slab is going to have a challenge forming that up and not damaging the waterproofing. And you want to make sure that you were working together to make sure that both trades are efficient. The concrete sub may be there first, and they may have bid it one way, and you need to make sure that you're coordinated. Roofing systems, first type of roofing systems that we'll talk about are membrane type systems or built-up systems. We look at these as areas, but you need to understand what is in part of that area, and that is where you look at your assembly. Roofing, they'll always have a roofing assembly in the architectural drawings, and that'll tell you whether you've got tapered insulation. How thick of insulation is it? Making sure that you have the right R value of the insulation. What kind of walkway pads do you have? How thick? What cover boards do you have? You need to understand all those different pieces of what goes into the roofing system, because sometimes they may insulate from the bottom of a building, and you might have roof deck, and they will shoot and mechanically attach the insulation to the bottom, the interior of the roof deck, and so your roofing system won't have any insulation for it. So you need to understand that. You need to understand whether it's mechanically fastened, which is what you see here, where you just have a steel deck, and so you actually have to mechanically fasten the system down to the deck, or whether it's fully adhered, where you're actually gluing it down to, say, a flat concrete slab. Then understanding also what your parapet conditions are. Are you wrapping the roof up the parapet, and how far are you wrapping it up the parapet? Does it have a counter flashing on it, or does it wrap up only a short way and you have a full metal panel coming down the backside of the parapet? You need to understand those details to make sure that you quantify the scope of the work properly. The other roofing system that we run into is metal roofing systems. Typically, this is called a standing seam roof system, where the seam in between the two joints actually stands up, and you see that common on houses, and you see metal roof for houses. You see it on metal roofs for canopies. But there are also other types of metal panel roof systems. You can have flat panels, and you can have, I've seen metal shingle roof systems as well. You need to understand what system you're working with. Look at the specs, read that. You still will take these systems off in areas, and you'll understand those areas. You'll need to understand what kind of insulation, what kind of membrane or vapor barrier that you need to put on underneath the system to build up that full assembly. And then you need to look at some of the flashings associated with that. Now, if they are just like a metal panel system on the facade, if it is an internal if it's a trim piece on the sides, if you're taking it off as, looking at it more like a general contractor and you're getting a subcontractor quote, don't need to worry about some of those trim pieces. If you're doing it as a self-perform and you are actually going to go out there and buy the material and do the work yourself, then you do need to worry about those trim pieces to make sure you've accounted for those in your bid. But what you do need to account for regardless is any kind of more trim pieces that transition the roofing to another system. Those can be like gutters, it can be a flashing or a drip edge that goes off the edge and ties into the facade as that facade and metal panel that metal roofing interact with each other. So it's important to make sure you find those details and take those off in the lineal footage that is associated with them. Then the final piece of the roofing systems are going to be all the miscellaneous items, and that is your flashings is the main thing. Flashings are going to be parapet caps. You're going to look at those as a lineal footage, and then have a description of what that parapet cap looks, because it may be more of a cornice and may have more of an architectural feature to it. So you need to make sure you account for the added surface area of the parapet cap in your pricing. It could be gutters and downspouts. Look at those as lineal footages. But then the other items that you have beyond flashings are roof hatches. You'll take those off each by size. Same with skylights. You look at that area of skylight and figure out what you have and what type of skylight do you have. Is it a fiberglass skylight? It is a glass skylight. Is it an off-the-shelf type domed skylight, or is it a custom skylight? Those are things that you really need to look at when you take off your area, so you can price the scope of the work out properly.
Real quickly, on the flashing, obviously with some flashing materials, they're pre-finished.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're primed. If you're a painter, what counsel would you give to the painter so they don't miss something that could be, I guess, expected to be coated?
The counsel that I would give is really pour through the specs in the drawings. Because the specifications, and that's not just looking at the painting specification. I mean, certainly you got to look through the painting specification, but cross-reference what you're painting too, because that oftentimes will tell you, how is it coming out to the site? Is it shot primed? Is it, what is it shot primed? Because then you'll need to understand, that for what your prep work might be, and then look at the drawings too, because sometimes on the drawings they'll denote where some of that work, they may denote pre-finished, stainless steel or whatever type of flashing it is. They may denote that in the actual details.
So if you're a painter, you may not see everything you're looking for in Division 9.
Yeah.
You may find it in, Division 5 in steel. You
Mm-hmm.
may find it in mechanical, whether there be exposed ductwork,
Right.
or even electrical conduit. And so thank you so much, Chris, for clarifying that.
Sure. So now we've enclosed the building now. Now let's go inside and start looking at the different types of interior systems that we'll see in the architectural world. First, we're going to talk about is concrete masonry units, CMU walls. We touched on this a little bit last week, as they can oftentimes be a structural system as well. But you take them off, take CMU walls off the same way, whether they're structural or just architectural. They are taken off by area, so you want the area by the type of CMU that you have. So is it 8-inch CMU? Is it 4-inch CMU? Is it 12-inch CMU? Because they're all going to cost a little bit different. But you also are going to need that lineal footage too. So you take off the lineal foot of wall on each floor as well as you take it off. So that's where it's important to really do a good detailed takeoff, which will most likely be by floor. So you'll have the areas for each wall type by floor, and you'll have the area and the lineal footage. And where the lineal footage comes in is that you need to include something for layout. So you're going to have to lay these walls out on a slab. So you're going to need to make sure that you account for the time it's going to take to make sure you get the wall in the right place. You may also need to drill and epoxy the dowels, because sometimes okay. Is that? No. So we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. So I will still keep talking.
We can still see it.
Oh, you can still, great. You can still see it on the screen there. Great. So you might, some CMU walls will have, they all have rebar in them. And so the reinforcing steel will come up, either it'll be set in the concrete that's below it, or sometimes it's more effective to drill and epoxy the rebar after the concrete's is hard, because you get the wall in the right place and you get all the dowels in the right place a lot easier. So if you're going to drill and epoxy the dowels, while that is an each count, you need to know the lineal footage that you're doing it, because there'll be a dowel every, say, 16 inches or 32 inches or 24 inches. So you'll need to be able to account for that from the lineal footage and understand how many dowels that you have to drill an epoxy. And then you need to know whether you're drilling one dowel or two dowels, because the wider the CMU, you may have 2 mats of rebar in it as well. You also need to understand what finish type it is. So is it smooth face? Is it split face? Is it a ground face? Is it a CMU? Is it an insulated CMU? So some CMU actually has insulation in the CMU to help with the facade or thermal issues. So you need to understand that. You need to understand what rebar is going into it, and know what that is going to cost. You look at rebar in pounds, so it will tell you on the drawings how to reinforce this and where to put your bond beams and what rebar goes in. Typically, they're pretty lightly reinforced, number 4 bars, sometimes number 5s, but they're not spaced as tightly as, say, a concrete wall. You also need to understand the temporary systems that go along with a CMU wall. You may need to include scaffolding if the wall is tall enough. You may need temporary bracing while the wall gets stabilized. You also need to understand if needs to be a sealer or a water repellent or an anti-graffiti coating attached to it. And is that in the mason scope or is that in the painter scope? It can go both ways. Most masons that I work with will always quote me an add-on to do the sealing themselves. Sometimes it makes more sense to give that to the painter and let the painter just do everything spraying, but that's not always necessarily doesn't always necessarily work from a schedule perspective, where you may be putting the CMU on the outside of the building and need to have someone out there sooner rather than later, where you're not doing the interior work at the same time to make that the painter as efficient as they could be. But those are the types of things you need to think about when you look at the CMU wall, and make sure that you account for things like embedded iron that might be in it, because sometimes you'll have an embed plate that gets laid in with the CMU, and so those are things that you need to think about as you look at the drawings and look at the details. The other type of wall system that we will typically see is drywall. So drywall systems, and all this would go similar to wood framed walls as well. The techniques of takeoff are similar to both of them. You really, on drywall, you need to look at your wall assembly. We take off drywall by area, square foot of walls, but by type of wall, because each wall is going to have a little bit different assembly and it's going to be framed out a little bit differently. So you need to have your areas by wall type, and that's where this wall assembly drawing that you'll find in or you should find at least in every set of drawings, will tell you exactly what you need. And the great thing is once you've taken off the area, you've taken off all the assemblies as well. All those parts and pieces, because it's the same area. Just like exterior walls run through the openings. So take that area right through the openings, unless there's a big, if you have a large opening where maybe you have a interior, almost like an interior curtain wall that may, at an atrium or something, that may be span 20 feet wide and 12, 15, 20 feet tall. Well, that type of area, back out, because you're really not going to run the wall through that. That's a large area. But even most all the small areas for doors, relights, things, interior windows, you will just not worry about taking out that area for the opening, because it's going to be a wash either way. Things to think about with drywall, outside of the different components, but you need to look at what type of drywall do you have. Is it a shaft liner? Is it type X drywall? Is it moisture resistant? Is it mold resistant? Is it impact board? You need to understand what type of drywall it is, because there's not just a material cost difference, but some of the types of drywall are going to take you longer to put in. In fact, sometimes you might even have a cement board that you need to put on, and that's going to take longer to put for your labor because it's a heavier material. You also need to understand what finish level. So there's different levels of finish for drywall. Is it fire taped? Is it an area where the public is not going to be there, so you're just taping over the holes and taping your seams and mudding all that up so that it's smooth, but you're not actually putting a finished surface over the whole thing and that where it's going to be painted? Is it going to have a level 4 finish? Is it going to have a level 5 finish, which involves skim coating the wall? Level 5 finish is going to cost more money, and so you need to account for that in your pricing. Then also look for reveals. So in lobbies, places where you have more public areas and then architect wants to put a little bit of relief into a large wall, sometimes they'll put little channels for reveals to break up the drywall more, so you don't see necessarily a big expanse of white surface there, or painted surface, but it may have some little reveals and a little relief to break it up, and maybe they can paint the different reveals different colors and create more of a surface to draw your eye to. Just need to understand what's involved in those details. Those will typically be shown on your interior elevations.
And those kinds of details will slow the production substantially in masking and obviously
Yes.
another coat of paint, all that.
Yeah. Once we move beyond the wall systems, we start looking at the ceiling systems. So in general, there's two types of ceiling systems that we deal with most commonly. There's drywall ceilings, or there's like a lay-in acoustic tile like what we have in the room that we're in right now. So a drywall ceiling can be a suspended drywall ceiling. It can be a frame drywall ceiling. You need to understand what type of system it is. Either way, you're going to be looking at the areas of ceiling. So a suspended ceiling is going to have hat channels on the box. It's going to have wires that's going to be suspended from the deck above it. A framed system is actually going to have studs that it's going to be framed at. And it's important to know this because sometimes you'll actually can get a 1 hour rated assembly as your ceiling. So then you have to understand that is going to have drywall on both sides, top and bottom, and a stud in the middle of it. And you need to understand that because that can get a little tricky when you get to your walls to make sure that you maintain that fire rating. And sometimes you'll even have to work with your inspector to make sure that they're comfortable with exactly how that's actually going to be installed in the field. But when you also have soffits. So soffits you see typically at the edges of the windows at the perimeter of a building, or you may see it in a conference room where you have a change in elevation of a drywall ceiling. The key things on the soffits is that soffits are always framed, so you need to understand that you have a horizontal surface, but you also have a vertical surface too. So you need to account for both of those surfaces in your areas that you take off. The last type of drywall ceiling that you'll have is a cove ceiling. So that's what you see in your restroom, where you've got at the mirror by the sinks, you look up and there's a little drywall thing that's got a light on the inside of it that shines the light up on the ceiling. That little cove you're going to take off as a lineal footage, because it's a specialty kind of system that's really going to be more apt to be taken off in a lineal footage. The other types of ceilings are going to be acoustical ceilings. You take these off by area, you'll have a suspended ceiling grid, you'll have ceiling tile in it of differing thickness. So it may be 2x2 ceiling, it may be 2x4 ceiling, it may be 2x6 ceiling, it may be a specialty system like an Optima system, where they may be large panels like 4x8 type systems that are suspended from the structure above. You just need to understand what system you're dealing with so you can price it out accordingly. They're still going to be taken off by area. And that goes the same with metal panel ceilings that you see, or wood ceilings that you see that are suspended in a similar fashion in different projects. Moving on, then we'll look at tiling first. And I separate tiling out from wall finishes and floor finishes because it's both. So tiling is typically looked at a little bit differently because it's a floor system and it's a wall system and it's a base system. So, and it's the same subcontractor who's going to be doing all of it. So things about tiling, again, the wall tile and your floor tile are going to be by area. Your base is going to be a lineal footage. But you need to understand whether you're dealing with thin set tile or thick set tile. So the difference between that is that a thick set tile is going to have a mortar bed below it you're going to set that down in. It's not a quick mortar there and stick the tile right on the wall with your spacers. It's going to be a much more labor intensive installation. You need to know whether there's a base slab. Some of these slabs, these thicker tile or stone tiles type slabs, will actually have a slab underneath them that you need to pour in for support. Details will show all this, so you'll be able to understand what that is, if you need it or not. The other thing that you need to know too is the cement board. So on wall tile, you need to put a cement board behind it. Wall tile doesn't go on drywall. You don't want the moisture in drywall. So you'll need to put cement board back there. You need to understand and look at both the specifications and any bidding instructions that you have to know whether is it the tiler who's going to install the cement board, or is it the drywaller who's going to install the cement board? Because it can be either one. And you just need to understand, make sure that you have your scopes correctly. Typically though, you'll take off your cement board from your tile takeoff. So it's even if you're doing drywall work and you've got the cement board in it, this is why you need to look at where the tile is, because you've got to make sure that you put the cement board in it. And then you add in your base by a lineal footage. And that really gets you the different types of tiles, and just to understand whether you're dealing with ceramic tile, porcelain tile, stone tile, precast tile. There's a number of different tiling systems. You just don't need to understand because they all cost differently. They all are installed a little bit differently. And then talking about other flooring systems, again, flooring systems are by area. This is, the great thing about, most architectural work is the big elements of it are all areas. So this can include carpet, it can include vinyl tile, it can include wood flooring, it can include epoxy coated flooring systems. You need to understand what you're dealing with. When you're dealing with areas, typically everything is by square footage except for carpet, and carpet is typically square yards. So you need to understand that if you get a quote if you're acting more as a general contractor and you're getting a quote for the carpet, that their price may very well be in price per square yard, not price per square foot. So you need to make sure that your takeoffs are coordinated when you're reviewing the bids. But other things that you need to think about with flooring are what the prep requirements are. Do you need to bead blast the floor to make sure that you have a rougher surface to adhere, say, a fluid applied flooring to? Do you need to make sure that you broom it? Should it be expected to be broomed clean? What are the moisture requirements? Now, most glued-on flooring system, carpet, VCT, the glues now are more water-based. So what your slab moisture is going to affect whether you get the flooring to adhere to the structure. There may be some testing involved. You may need to do some of the testing, and you may need to do the testing whether it tells you to do it or not, to make sure that you know that your product is going to work and adhere to that surface. It may, on older buildings, that you really don't necessarily have any control over what that slab moisture is. You may spray down a membrane that inhibits moisture on it. They have products, they're fairly expensive, but if you're doing a renovation project, that may be the best thing that you can do to ensure that you get that adherence of your flooring system. The last piece that's always taken off with the flooring is the base, and so that's lineal footage. The most common type of base you'll ever see is resilient base or rubber base. Rubber base for the last 26 years has cost somewhere between $1 a lineal foot and $2.50 a lineal foot, and it hasn't changed much in the last 25 years. So it's a very inexpensive material. When you take off resilient base, go right through the doors. Don't worry about taking out for the doors, because it really isn't going to cost a lot. That you're not. I mean, if you're losing $3, $4, $5 on a door, and it's not. It's pales in comparison to what it's going to cost you to cut the everything.
Really quickly,
Yes.
you covered the wall tile, application, and
Yes.
on the floor, there's a lot of different variables. Obviously, if you're in a slab on grade, that's a pretty clean, tight situation. But if you're not in a slab on grade, at least in the multifamily and single family environment, there are other alternatives other than just the concrete board, or and so do you have recommendations on a certain application? Obviously, engineers and architects develop their own specs on what's the best solution, but with your experience, do you have some recommendations?
Well, if we're talking flooring systems here, so flooring systems, typically you want something more cementitious. So if you're on a concrete building or a steel building, you've got a concrete floor, that's what you want to be on. Oftentimes, if you're the concrete subcontractor, you need to understand where the tile is, because oftentimes the tile will have a depression in your slab that'll be set down anywhere from a 1/2 inch to 2 inches if it's a thick set mortar set slab or tile. So you need to, as a concrete sub, you need to understand where that is, because you need to account for that extra formwork. But concrete's always the best thing. You may have a cementitious underlayment that you put down, and it may be dripcrete, but you'll have some kind of surface. You're typically not putting it right on the plywood, but oftentimes, with flooring, sometimes you may need to have floor fill. They may include some floor fill, that underlayment, as part of the flooring package, so which kind of goes along with the tiling as well, just to make sure that any kind of depressions that may be there are smoothed out and you have a level surface. Last thing about bases are you can also have wood base, you can also have metal base, or an MDF base. With those bases are more expensive. You want to stop them at the doors. You want to stop them at openings and make sure that you take those off, because those can run $10, $15, $25 a lineal foot, and now you're talking more real money there, that especially as you think about it over the course of a building. But typically you see wood base or metal panel base in highly public areas where there's a higher level of finish for it. Lobbies, atriums, sometimes high conference rooms or specialty rooms where a client's going to bring in guests for fundraising type of events. That's where you would typically see those kind of bases in there. Then the next area, we've talked about the floors, we've talked about the ceilings, now let's talk about the walls. So wall finishes are applied. So they're applied to gypsum surfaces. So make sure that if you see on a wall finish schedule, if it says plaster on that, plaster as the finish, know that you have a wall behind it. So if you're the drywall subcontractor and you're looking at a finish schedule, just because it doesn't say drywall or paint on it, it may say paint and plaster there, and that the plaster is going to be applied to the, well, you may paint the plaster. So you may paint the plaster, but the plaster is going to be applied to a drywall surface. So you just need to understand that to make sure that, especially as a drywaller, to make sure that you account for all the work. So you can have plaster, you could have wood paneling, you could have metal paneling, so decorative metal. You could have acoustic panels, which are not always necessarily going to cover the entire wall, but they may cover portions of the wall in a conference room or a classroom to make sure that you cut that. They are there to absorb some of the noise and just the general din of people talking there, so that students can actually hear more of what's going on in the classroom. You may have a wainscoting, and that could be a wood wainscoting, it could be an FRP, or so a plastic wainscoting that you see oftentimes in like janitor's closets around a mop sink. Sometimes you'll also see that FRP coating in a bathroom area as a way to save money from using ceramic tile on your wet walls. Those are all taken off per area. Things that you would look at on a lineal footage basis are things like wood trim, little trim pieces, chair rails, trim around a door opening. Those are things that you'll take off on a lineal footage basis. And then the last piece of some of this interior finish work is painting. So painting is done by area. You need to understand what areas are being painted and what painting you're using. And is it a paint or is it a coating? Because typically they go hand in hand, and in a bid package that you see is probably going to be paints and coatings. So if there's a high performance coating that's going on your, say, exterior structural steel, you may look at that. It may be there may be a chemical resistant coating that you're putting as a flooring that's also wrapping up the wall 2-3 feet, because it's going to have a corrosive environment in it, and they need a special finish there. Things to think about, what type of paint it is, and look at your specs. So here's where painting is where you need to look at your specs and look at your specs and look at your specs, because there will be a paint schedule in that spec, and it will tell you the type of paint, how many coats, how is it primed, how is it prepped. It will tell you all that information, and then it'll tell you the different types of paint and what colors they are, and do you have an eggshell? Is it a semi-gloss? And where do those paints go, and what areas do you need to look at to make sure you paint? Because the same paint, it might be P2, but you might have 3 different types of P2, because one may be semi-gloss, one may be maybe eggshell, one may be matte. It could be a flat finish in certain areas. You just need to understand what the painting is and what surface it's being applied to, so you can understand the prep. Make sure you understand your masking requirements too, because masking is going to be a big deal, especially if you've got a wall with multiple colors of paint on it. Or as you transition, if you've got a wall and then you've got an alcove into that wall, around those corners, that alcove it may have a different color paint on the sides that go into it, and then another type of color of paint on the back wall. So it could really, you have 3 different types of paint there. You need to make sure you mask it off right, and you understand that time to mask it off and prep the area to make sure, because oftentimes paint is going to be going in when you have finished surfaces. So you make sure you need to protect those finished surfaces and get the flooring covered up and windows covered up to make sure that, because you don't want to get overspray on things. So once we've done our kind of finished surfaces, another piece that's major area of interiors is doors, frames, and hardware. These are all looked at as each counts, but by size and by material. So if we start off with frames, interior frames, you want to look at, is it a single door opening? Is it just one door? Is it two doors? They each cost differently. Group it by size. Now, is it a 6x8? Is it a 7x8? Is it a 3x7 single door? Now, as you work through doing the takeoffs, you'll start seeing that I can group the material pricing. For the material pricing, I can group some of these sizes together. It might be, I'm going to summarize all my 3-foot wide to 3'6" wide doors together because there's not much price difference in between a 3-foot door opening and a 3'4" door opening. Those are just experience will tell you as you get the pricing on the material side what you can do and what you need to break out. But you also need to note things like transoms or side lights and relights. So this is a transom panel. A transom panel is basically it's a window above the door. So you need to know that because your frame is going to be more expensive. It's going to take you a little bit longer to put in. Plus you need to account for the glass that's going to have to go in there later. Now the glass is probably done by a glazer and not by whoever's installing the door. But if you're looking at this as a general contractor, you need to understand that, hey, that glass isn't just there because I said transom panel. You need to make sure you have the transom panel and the glass. And in a relight, which is say a hollow metal window in the inside of the building, you'll need to take off that square footage. You might take that off as a square footage because it's a window. But you need to make sure that you need to account for both the frame. So you'll have a square footage of frame and then a square foot of glass, and you need to price both of them out because it could be two different subcontractors doing the work. Flipping down to doors, you need to note the material. You can have wood doors. Are they solid core? Are they hollow core? Hollow metal doors. You can have steel doors. You can actually have aluminum doors too that are standalone aluminum doors that aren't part of an aluminum window or storefront system. You need to account for those and summarize those separately. Group them again by size, but you don't need to understand whether they're part of a double door assembly or a single door assembly because you just look at those as each leaf of the door. But you need to note whether the doors have glazing in them. So if you have got door lights like these doors have, you need to account for the cutout when you price out the door, but also the glass that goes in it, the same way that you would for a transom panel or relight or a side light.
And if you're installing the doors, you need to know if those doors are going to be grouted. And again, on the finishes, you need to be aware of that.
Yes. Things to know, with the frames, understand, are there grouting requirements or are there insulation requirements? Sometimes you'll need to do a spray type of fireproofing and or spray insulation in the door frame to account for acoustics or something like that. And oftentimes you can do that before you install the door, but you also need to know whether the doors are going to be installed, the frames are going to be installed like in a CMU wall. Are you going to install the frames with the CMU, or are you going to install them after the fact? If you install them with the CMU or before the CMU, after the fact, and they need to be grouted, how are you going to grout it? Well, what happens is that you're going to have to knock a hole in either whether it's a concrete wall or a CMU wall. You're going to have to knock a hole in it, in the wall, and then grout it and patch it back. So you need to understand those things because you've got to have access to get the material in. And grout, cementitious grout isn't something you're really going to put in beforehand and then install it because it's going to make the door frame really heavy. and it's a fluid system, so it would be very hard to actually do that. Looking at hardware, each counts by the type of system. There will be a hardware schedule. If you get a construction set of drawings in the specs, there will be a hardware schedule that will tell you you know, hardware group 3 has three jams, an exit device, and it's got an, weather stripping around it. It will tell you all that you need to know about what goes in the doors, so you can take off the hardware groups and apply them to take off the quantity of hardware groups that you have, and then realize how much do you have of each type of door hardware that's part of that hardware group. One thing to note too is, if you're looking at this, is what are cross-trade hardwares? Electrical hardware is the typical thing. So electrical hardware oftentimes will maybe purchased by whoever's supplying the door hardware, but it's installed by the electrician because it needs to be wired. So you need to understand, what those scopes of work and how that scope of work is divided up. Also understand that, sometimes the in an aluminum door system in a storefront window system, like we talked about when we were talking about facades, oftentimes that hardware will be supplied by the window subcontractor as well. But that may not necessarily be shown in that hardware schedule. So you might need to understand and look at your bidding instructions to know what that scope is and whether it's in your scope or whether it's in the window subcontractor scope. Things that you need to think about just to make sure that you account if you're bidding on work, and so that you have the right scope in your bid. Those are the major things you need to think about for hardware. When I price out hardware, typically the way that I look at a detailed version of hardware is I look at all the different components of the hardware and price those out just material-wise, and then I'll have a separate line item for the installation on each door, because it's a little bit too detailed to try to figure out how long does it take to put a jam in, how long does it take to put an exit device in. But you can look at the hardware group and say, hey, that's going to take 4 hours. It's going to take me 4 hours a leaf to put all the door hardware on. And that's where the way that I look at the doors. So then that's covered all the major systems. The minor systems that you have in architectural, you've got specialties. So master format division 10, fire extinguishers, toilet accessories, toilet partitions, marker boards, chalkboards, those type of things. They're all each counts. You look at them, each counts by the size, typically. Division equipment, so master format division 11. Architecturally speaking, you'll look at residential appliances. You will see loading dock equipment, so dock bumpers, dock levelers. Those type of items are specified there. You'll also see specialty equipment, say like lab equipment, will be, if you're looking at a laboratory project, that will be specified in division 11. Furnishings, so division 12, those are things like your window treatments, so your blinds, mini blinds, shades. It'll have counters and casework in it. So casework is one of those things that can be specified in either division 6 or division 12. And typically, the way that it's broken out is custom casework and more standard casework is division 6. So that'll be an architectural woodwork or 6410 specification. Specialty casework, so metal casework, lab casework, kitchen casework, will be specified in division 12. And that's the way that, just as a specification system, that it breaks out to look at that. But you need to know that, because sometimes not every casework sub does every type of casework. And especially if you're dealing with lab casework, you need to you may be looking at a specialty lab casework supplier, because those have special requirements. And then the countertops, the countertops are specified frequently in division 12. So are they stone countertops? Are they concrete countertops? Are they, if it's a lab, is it an epoxy resin countertop? You'll be able to see that in there. And I've flip-flopped these there because you often see elevators and escalators, and technically that's part of the architectural piece of it. So, you look at elevators and escalators. If you're looking at it as a general contractor, we look at them as type of elevator by stop. So how many stops does it have on the floor? You're always going to want to go get a quote for those. So, because those are only, elevators and escalators are only done by certain subcontractors. So that's where you need to go to make sure you get your pricing right. And the last piece doesn't necessarily come up a lot. We don't see is Division 13, which is specialty construction. And there's a lot of different things in there. The most common thing I see in specialty construction is pre-engineered metal buildings, which is more of a structural item, but those are the kind of things that you see in Division 13, and they don't come up very often, so that's why I put them down at the bottom.
Real quickly, and thank you again for elaborating on these minor systems, because these minor systems may seem like minor systems, but there are an opportunity in some of these larger projects for firms to grow to scale. And one example, obviously, the visual display boards. As you look around this building that we're in right now, we actually have a whiteboard right now that's going to be sold, because that's considered old technology, and new technology with these new visual and very smart technology boards are becoming more available. And if you imagine you're doing a large building, there could be several of these in the building. Also in Division 10, you'll also see bath accessories and bath partitions. And that's another opportunity for small firms to be able to develop a little specialty. Could also be toilet partitions, or toilet bars, paper towel holders, soap dispensers, right. All those. And it creates an opportunity for a small minority business to scale on a project. You wouldn't think it would be substantial, but if you add up 100 rooms, it can add up. Yeah,
definitely a large project, and those items can add up to a good contract. And almost all of these are taken off on an each count. When you get into some of the window treatments, you'll look at square footages. Counters can be square footage or lineal footage. You either do look at it as a lineal footage by width, or just the square footage of counter surface. And casework is typically taken off on a lineal footage basis by the type of casework that it is. So that concludes kind of the takeoff piece of it. So we'll start doing some sample takeoffs. So we've got 3 sample takeoffs to work through. First one is going to be taking off a drywall partition. And this drywall partition does have some wall tile. And we're not going to actually take off the wall tile, but we're going to focus in on the drywall partition. So you can see we've got one wall. We're just going to look at this wall right here in this bathroom. We've got the elevation here. We've got the wall assembly there. It's a wall type SA14 for this project. And so the first thing we need to do is to take off the area of the wall. So we've gone through our blue beam. It's 9 lineal feet of wall. The floor to floor height here is 15 feet 4 inches. So that gets us 138 square feet. That's our base number that we need. Then we'll need to start looking at the pieces of the assembly. And this particular wall is actually SA, and it's 1 and 4. And what that 1 means on this, if looking at the key here, is that the 1 is the fire rating. So we know we have a 1-hour rated wall assembly. The 4 is the framing size designation. So if we go back to our stud and CMU size designation, we see that 4 means that we have a 4-inch stud wall. So now we can look at our type SA flooring system and know that we have a 1-inch shaft liner. We've got a 4-inch CH stud at 24 inches on center. We've got acoustical insulation. We've got a finished gypboard layer. And we are STC 46 rated, which means we're going to have to put some acoustical sealants on the wall. And because it's fire rated, we're going to need to make sure we put a fire caulking at the top of the wall to make sure that assembly, as it comes into the slab above it, has a proper fire rating. So now that means that we need to know what that lineal footage of wall is, which we took off there. It was the 9 lineal feet. The next step, once we have those general areas is that we need to recognize that we do have tile, so we need to put cement board there. So let's measure the tile. We measure the tile, it's 24 square feet. So we need to add the cement board in at 24 square feet and deduct the 24 square feet out of our finished drywall number to make sure that we've got the right amount for our installation. So we'll take those numbers, we'll summarize them up. The way that I like to summarize these things, since we've got basically one number there, is I'll usually put the wall type and put that area of wall up there, and then add in all my detail for my assembly there, and just pull off that same cell in Excel. If you're not using Excel, if you're using an estimating system, you'll use whatever works for you. This is just something that I've developed when I'm using Excel to make things go a little bit faster, and know that if I come back later, if say I got an addendum and this wall, the area of this wall changed, if we went from 138 square feet to 200 square feet, then I can just change one number, and then all my other numbers will change after that. So tricks of the mechanics of putting together an estimate.
And a real quick clarification, you had talked about the wall tile and how the concrete board would need to be installed. We're talking about deducting the finish of that drywall, not necessarily the drywall itself, because it had the special fire rating. And so in essence, you would have an unfinished drywall wall that would have tile applied to the exterior.
So you price those things out, and I'm pricing them out as if I'm subcontracting the work. Add on some markups for your general conditions, your taxes, insurance, fee, and we've got just a little over $5,300 for this for this wall. Next sample takeoff we're going to do is a door frame and hardware. So we're looking at an interior door. We're looking at door 52. It is a type C door. It is 3 foot by 7 foot. It's a wood door. The frame is a type 1 frame, and it's a hollow metal frame. The hardware group is 107. It does not have a fire rating. And then so I've attached this with some of the details from that. So the type 1 door is just a standard frame. The type C door has a door light in it, so we need to account for the door light. And then we've got the hardware group for what hardware group 107 has in there. The first thing we're going to look at is taking off the frame. So we've got type 1 hollow metal frame, 3 foot by 7 foot, 1 each. Then we'll look at the door itself. And the door is wood, so we'll make sure that we know that it's wood. It's type C. It's 3 foot by 7 foot. It's got a cutout for a door light, because we're going to want to put a little premium on there to make sure that that door light is cut out, because that's extra fabrication dollars. And we need to make sure that we know what that area is to make sure that we account for the glass that goes in it. So then we'll look at, hey, what is in hardware group 107? Well, it's got 3 hinges, it's got an office lock set, it's got a permanent core, it's got a wall bumper, and it's got 3 door silencers. And we've got 1 set of hardware group 107. We'll go summarize those quantities to price them out. I've priced this out more of labor and install. So my hollow metal frame here, I've got the labor to install it, 1 each, material pricing. Same thing for the wood door. I've got a premium for the cutout, and that's just going to be on the material side because it's just a fabrication item. Looking at the finish hardware, I've got all the different pieces of the hardware group, just material pricing, and then I've included 1 set here of this hardware group, and included some installation dollars to install the whole group of hardware. Then because I'm looking at this more globally and making sure that I include everything, I've included that door light. It's a 6 inch by 30 inch door light. There's 1 of them, got it in there at $150 installed. Add your markup structure on it, and you get to $2,700. to install the door with all the hardware. Last one that we're going to look at is painting a wall. So here's a wall that we're going to paint. It's paint 2. If there's the wall elevation so that we can take off the areas. Then there's excerpts from the specifications for the paint color schedule, the prep work here, and what the paint schedule says. So first thing we need to do is take off the painted area. Using Blue Beam, we take off the area as 217 square feet. And then we take that area to make sure that we start reviewing what the specifications are. What do we need to include in the pricing? Well, for when we go out to get our quote for the paint material itself, we need to know what color it is. We'll need to know the surface prep requirements. For this one, it says to remove all dust and dirt with a brush if necessary. So we need to account for taking a brush and making sure we're brushing it down. And then the paint schedule says that for new gypsum wallboard, it's a latex paint and it's eggshell. We've got 1 prime coat and 2 finish coats. So that's what we need to account for when we start pricing it out. So we'll take our quantity and start pricing it out, prepping the surface and masking it off, spraying the primer coat down, and then spraying the 2 finish coats. Once you finish, putting your markups on there, you've got $270. Yes.
On the last one, you said that it didn't say 2 finish coat, it said and a coat. It didn't say 2 finish coat, it said a coat.
Let me look.
Right.
Oh yeah. So this is what it says. So what I'm saying here is that this tells you what the type of paint is, what the primer is, and what coat, how many coats, and what the type of coats that you have. So that type of coats would include the numbers. That's what I meant to say. Sorry for the confusion.
It's okay, I know that.
Now, on this one, and obviously when we're talking about the finishes, and go back to the last slide, when you're talking about the finishes, you're at the tail end of the project. And so now the fire sprinkler sub who's installing the escutcheon plates on all the the lids, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He bumps into the wall, right? And so what counsel would you give to the finish contractors that are spending so much time to get the project immaculate, and then all of a sudden the punch list is coming through?
Well, what I would say is hopefully your general contractor has thought about that some and has put an allowance for touch-up paint that isn't, allocable to, hey, this guy came in and he wasn't being careful and he gashed the paint.
You could put that in a quote too.
Right.
Here's a suggestion for a touch-up allowance.
Right. And sometimes.
Suggestion.
You hear that?
But on the pool, I said there's no trade damage, so that means.
Right. But yeah, I mean, and the thing is there's what I would call allocable trade damage and unallocable trade damage. So allocable trade damage means you can say this subcontractor damaged this wall and he was being that subcontractor was being careless. That and there may be a back charge type situation.
And I know it come from I know for sure it come from the door guy deliverance and the Shiro delivering. That's when you get those.
Yeah. But sometimes you have trade damage where it's just there's a lot of work going on and everyone's being real careful, but the wall still gets some nicks in it and needs some touch-up paint. And that's where you can either have a suggestion for an allowance. Hey, I think you should carry an allowance of $5,000 for trade damage that just may not be there. And you wouldn't necessarily put it in your bid because you don't want to have your bid $5,000 higher when it's really technically it's not your. You can fight about it later as far as hey, I didn't do it, so I need contractually, I need to be paid to go touch it up because it's not, I don't have trade damage in my contract. Or, I know that oftentimes on some of our projects, we will talk about with the owner to make sure that we have, when we bid out both drywall and painting work, we'll have an allowance set in there in the bid form and says, here, we're going to have $5,000 for unallocable trade damage. So you're covered. We know that we've got something in there for things that, everyone tried to do exactly what it was, and we don't know who did it. And everyone was being careful, and it got damaged. I mean, sometimes paint gets damaged when you rub into it. Bump into it and you get some dirt on it, and you can't get it off. So, oftentimes I would suggest bringing it up and addressing it with some kind of allowance for the things that you can't pinpoint on, and bringing that up with the general contractor to make sure that there's some kind of allowance for that. That's for the unallocable. The stuff that's where it says, you can really pinpoint that someone is being careless, then typically you're going to handle that as a back charge type situation too. And if you need to get the general contractor involved, and most subcontractors I know, if they know that they damaged something and I didn't mean to do it, but I did it, they'll step up and say, hey, we did it, send me the bill to fix it. And then you can just deal with it between your two companies. But sometimes you need to get the general contractor involved, and then we can help negotiate that. So last piece of this is starting to talk about pricing considerations. So we're talking about labor production. What can your crews do in the field? Labor rates, material pricing, and then the art of estimating. It's the logistics and then the markup structures. So as far as production, where do you find production rates? So if you've been on the other two sessions here, this will be a third time of getting this, because it's important. You can get production rates out of a means guide or a trade publication. The best way to get your production rates is from your own crews in the field. So if you are not tracking your production in the field, start doing it. Make sure that you understand what your crews can do so that you can have a better understanding of where you need to bid work and what you can actually perform in the field, and then actually be able to look at that and analyze that and see where can I improve on it. Because you may say, hey, we didn't have very good production on this project, but we ran into X, Y, and Z on that project, and this new project we're not going to run into X, Y, and Z, and I think we can get hit half of that production, and really work hard at it. And then so that knowledge is power, so you can take that knowledge and be able to both improve your bidding and get your bids tighter, but also track it in the field against your estimate to make sure that you're staying to your estimate. Or do you need to make a quick course correction because you see your crews are behind aren't meeting your productivity rate, and is there a reason why? So you need to be able to, you don't want to find that out at the end of the job. You want to find that out right as it's happening so you can fix the problem, right? So so those are the productivity rates. The other way to look at it is crew basing productivity rates, and that really involves taking an actual crew, and what a crew, whether it's 2 carpenters and a laborer or 2 painters and a laborer, what that crew can put in place in the field. I often use the crew-based estimates. That's a superintendent is going to really understand the crew-based types of estimating, because that's how they work in the field. They deal with crews and manpowers. They don't necessarily deal with productivity units. It's a great way to be able to back check your estimates with your superintendent. And I've done that a couple times where I've looked at something with productivity rates, bring in the superintendent, and we look at it as a crew, compare the two, and make sure that we're in the same ballpark for labor and manpower and the workers and the worker hours, to make sure that we're looking at the same job. Because if we're way off, then we need to talk about how we're looking at the project, because there's a disconnect there, and that's something important that you want to know before you go out and get work, and then have the person running the work run it in a way that doesn't align with your estimate, because that can have negative effects financially. But your past performance is knowledge, so you just need to understand what you can do in the field so that you know how to improve and how to sharpen your pencil to get your bids as tight as possible. Labor rates, you need to know, are you a union shop? Are you an open shop? Your base wage versus all the labor adders, your tax, your fringe, your workman's comp. Are you adding anything in there for small tools or scheduled overtime? Or just the overtime that you're going to need to do over the course. Hey, I'm going to have to work a couple of my workers, a couple hours here, a couple hours there on overtime just to get the work done. And do I need to account for some of that casual overtime that they spent, say, just finishing up taping a job to make sure that the wall is done before you leave for the day? Those are the kind of things you need to think about on labor rates. Material pricing, talking with your vendors and your subcontractors. Where are you buying the material? Making sure that when you go out and get a quote, that you understand what you're going to be getting back, and that the vendor or subcontractor understands what you are expecting of the vendor or subcontractor, so that there's no disconnect. And if you're in a bid situation, you don't get a quote and you're expecting everything in square footage, and they are talking lineal footage of something, and now suddenly you have to go back through all your takeoffs and figure out, okay, how do I convert all the square footage to lineal footage on the fly? And that's just opens the door for errors in a bid, and you want to try to prevent that as much as possible. So making sure you're coordinated with your vendors and subcontractors, that any kind of exclusions that the vendor or subcontractor might have, that you've accounted for that. Because if you know that they're going to exclude cement board, for instance, ahead of time, well, then you can go price that out, and so that when you get their quote, you've already got the other price that goes with it, and you've got a full, complete system. And that's the key thing there. And equipment pricing, so are you renting it from a third party, or do you own the equipment, or are you renting it to yourself? Is the job long enough duration where it actually makes sense to buy the equipment instead of renting it? And then prorating that over maybe the courses of several jobs, so that you have the equipment, and you've got to maintain it, but now I've got some equipment there and I don't have to go to a third party to rent it. I own the equipment, and I can choose how much I charge for it, depending on the project and what the environment's like. Because if it's a recession type environment like we saw 2010 and 2012, well, you might just say, I own the equipment and I don't need to charge for it, and that means my bid can be lower. That's a valid bidding strategy. Then we get into the art of estimating, and that's logistics. So that's things like schedule considerations. When is the work being done? Is it being done in 2 weeks? Is it being done in 2 years? Understanding what types of escalation and inflation rates that you need to include in your bid to make sure that you get the right number. Those are important things to think about. And then, is there adequate time in the schedule? Finished work happens at the end. You need to look at the schedule. It may be some tight windows to get work in place. And it may be that there's a very valid reason for that, and you may have to put in 7 days work in 5 days time, and you need to understand that, hey, that means I'm going to have to work 16 hours of overtime to make sure that I get it in the 5 hours, because it's going to take the same amount of time to do the work, but I just have less time to do it. Or do I need to figure on double shifting, and then do I need to account, if I'm a union contractor on a double shift, am I paying 8 hours for 7.5 hours worth of actual work per the union agreements? So you need to understand those schedule constraints to make sure that you can price out the work in the proper way. And then what work will be in your way. Yeah, I mean, you know, are there, look at, and that's going out and walking the job even too, you know, it's, yeah, especially if if the general contractor is staging the bids and you're down at the end, so they're bidding the work out towards the end, you may have an opportunity to walk the job while it's being constructed. So you can go in, you'll be able to walk in and see, okay, oh, that didn't seem quite that high on the plans, but I'm gonna need some scaffolding here. So those are things that you need to think about as far as, you know, how do I massage this and make sure that I'm accurately pricing out what it's going to take to install the work. And site conditions, so things like access, do I have access to the work, or is it, you know, is the access as such that my productivity is going to be impeded? And I'm going to need to estimate 4 hours to do the work where it should only take 2 hours. Hoisting, if you need hoisting, and sometimes you don't need hoisting on finished work. Some of the architectural work doesn't need that. Some of the facade work, yes. Sometimes curtain wall can be hoisting and with that, or you may be installing things out of boom lifts or scissor lifts, or you may be able to install it from the inside of the building. You just need to understand that so that you know how to properly price it. And lay down and storage, are you dealing with just-in-time deliveries, or do you have some space where you can actually store some material? Do you need to rent a warehouse? You know, if you have to rent a warehouse, that's an added cost, and you need to make sure that you account for that added cost in your bid. And finally, the last piece of this is the markup structures. And I'm not going to get into a lot of details on the markup structures on what how to look at some of this, because it's a class in itself. And we are planning on, in the future, doing another class that specifically looks at markup structures and general conditions and general requirements, because there's a lot that goes into that and looking at how you look at that. But a general markup structure is going to include your general conditions. It's going to include your general requirements. And what those are, it's your staffing. It is, you know, how do your project manager, your non-productive, you know, superintendent, if you have a project engineer, you know, putting together submittals or shop drawings or doing detailing, those are the kind of things that would be in general conditions. And it would also include things like your safety program, you know, any cost that you may have for parking, or, you know, offsite parking or busing, depends on the contract, it depends on what's in your bid instructions. You'll need to have insurance for the project, so, you know, you need to account for understand what types of insurance you need, and what those values are, and what they're computed off of. So talking with your insurance company to make sure that you get the right quotes for the right types of coverage. Bonds, do you need to provide a bond on the project, a performance and payment bond? For bidding, are you providing a bid bond, or are you writing a cashier's check? Is it a project that, say, this general contractor may have subcontractor default insurance on, so you don't need to provide a bond? Or are you bonding your third-tier subcontractors? So if you have subcontractors beneath you, you may want to bond them to make sure that in case they go into default, you will have coverage there. And then taxes. In the state of Washington, we've got B&O tax, we've got sales tax. You need to understand where they're applied and where you need to apply the taxes. And then finally is fee. Overhead and profit. What's the job worth for you to get the job? How much risk are you taking? So how much reward are you expecting to get? And how do you counter that with, I've got other people looking at this the same way, and they may put a lower fee on it, and that may prevent me from getting the job. Things you need to think about when you put fees on a project and when you bid work. And with that, we'll open it up to questions. If anybody has questions online or
I don't believe we have any questions. I just checked with Steve. Hang on one sec. Let me run over there and get that.
Just a thank you.
Oh, just a thank you?
Thank you to Hoffman Construction.
Okay. All right. I had a couple of things, but I will save for my section. Why don't you go ahead and continue on to the conclusion?
Okay, so in conclusion, what we've covered today, we've covered architectural scopes. We've covered methods of taking off quantities and how to price and considerations you need to think about when you price out the quantities and the scopes of the work. Now, all of what we've talked about today applies to new items because you will always find new types of work and new things in construction, new technologies. And when you come across something new, everything I've talked about today applies to that. Look at the quantities, what quantities make sense, talk to your vendors to make sure they agree with those and what you're going to get a material price for, and then look at what the labor is and to install the work. And then and whatever you come across, whether it's suddenly having glass as a facade system that's not a window, it's glass on top of an exterior wall system. That's something new. Okay, well, how much is the glass worth per square foot? Okay, let's think about what that's going to. Okay, what do we need to figure out for breakage of glass, or what do we need to account for? That's how I dealt with it when I first came across the Wazoo Art Museum, and suddenly we're dealing with a glass facade that I had never seen before. So everything that you know and learn, you just apply to the new, and that will take you through whatever comes across your way. We always like to talk about future opportunities. So upcoming projects in pre-con, we've got the Overlook Walk project, which is part of the waterfront redevelopment. It's a pedestrian bridge that will connect Pike Place Market to the Seattle Aquarium. That will start bidding in the fall of this year. The IMA pool renovation project is a design build project we have over at University of Washington. We'll start procurement summer and fall this year. Then Project S, which is a private developer-led office building. We'll start procuring late this year and early into next year. And actually, as of yesterday, we can move the King County West Point treatment plant up to the projects in pre-con. So we will be starting procuring that. We're doing electrical upgrades, and there's other buildings and stuff associated with that as part of improving the performance at West Point treatment plant over in Magnolia. We'll start that procurement in fall of this year. Then we are also proposing on the design build project for the King County Metro interim bus electrification project. So that's King County's moving to all electric buses. We'll start procuring that work because it's a design build proposal. We have to have a full price on. So we will need to start engaging subcontractors in order to get that price put together. That will happen this summer and into the fall. And the last slide that I have, just as Dan's coming up here, our contact information. So if you need to get a hold of me, if you have a question, feel free to email me so that, and I'll do my best to try to answer the question for you.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, well, we're going to relaunch another survey. So please, all of you that are tuned in, keep a look on that survey. And I just wanted to just remind folks, this is information that we're hoping that you put in your toolbox and you're able to apply it to your business and your organization immediately. This is not something that we want to sit on your desk or end up in a file cabinet. This is information that is useful for your business. It's useful for helping you get the meat off the bone on these very lean projects where it's really hard to make a profit on these projects. So you want to make sure that you're aware of those things. I wanted to just bring your attention again to a couple of pieces in this wonderful presentation. And you heard Chris mention crew-based confirmation, and basically you're reaching out to your crew and you're assessing what they believe their production would be. for a specific piece of work. And in RS means, I believe you can develop an assembly like formula. And so, as Chris mentioned, hey, we may have 2 carpenters and a laborer involved in this work. And so it's really important that you're looking and verifying with your historical data, as mentioned again by Chris, as well as confirming with your supervisors to get better information to make sure that your assembly values are correct. And again, looking at something on a drawing is one thing, but as Chris mentioned, whenever you're bidding a project, especially if there's multiple commas involved, we would highly advise you to actually get your eyes on the site, walk that site, look at the variables and those conditions and the parameters that you need to be thinking about honing your estimate into. If in fact you have a very easy scope, but the access to that work is going to be challenging, then you're going to have to confirm that. Again, you have your crew-based values, but then you have to, bring logic into it. What floor is this work going to be done? Are the elevators going to be installed by this time? Let's take a look at the schedule and see when the contractor wants us to perform this work. Is that going to impact, when we wanted to do the work? And should we preface our bid to say this work is going to be done in the summer? And it's going to be done in the summer because, we anticipate you're going to be doing all this other preparation work prior to that time. And at this time, the weather will be okay, so we're not going to need any temporary heat for drying, whether it's drying mud or flooring adhesive. And so these are things that you want to take into consideration as you're putting together these estimates that, could put your livelihood at stake. I mean, some of us are putting our houses on the line to do these projects, and we want to hold on to those houses. Steve, I'm going to look back to you to see if we've got some responses and if you wanted to report anything before we can conclude the class.
There was a question about emailing the presentation.
Emailing the presentation, yes. All of the attendees will be sent a Adobe PDF document, which will have this PowerPoint. I believe we've sent both the civil and the structural PowerPoints to all the participants. And if there's any stragglers, please feel free to reach out to us to get that to us. There was a question in the first class as it related to this takeoff tool that Chris and Hoffman has developed over time. And Chris was actually sent us a copy of those spreadsheets that were used for the civil side. I think we're probably going to ask if we can get our hands on the structural and the architectural as well, so those can be references for this class. And again, I want to preface this is reference material. Wood, steel, concrete, paint, everything. The prices are very dynamic and they change on a daily basis. So this is reference for your reference only. But some of these values are pretty current as of today's market. But again, this video and this class is going to be played probably years in the future. And so we just want to advise those folks in 2025 to use 2025 current pricing. Again, I just want to thank all the team that was put together that helped produce this wonderful class. I want to put a special recognition for our media and video crew, our Emmy Award winning producer over here, who is Travis Cooper with Cooper Visual, and our community photographer of going on 4 decades of taking pictures of our communities and family events and meaningful events in our community, Keith with Fly Right Productions. Without them, you all that are on here digitally would not be present. And so again, we want to thank you for all your help and participation. We are very excited about the partnership that we have with Emerald Cities, and we believe that there will be more content, more classes to be considered in the future. We are in discussions of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and even covering energy and solar. And so we're very excited about the future. We're very excited about the partnerships we have. And we couldn't be more excited to have a facility like Tabor 100 has brought to us, to be able to empower us to be able to deliver quality content that will be useful for your businesses. With that, I just want to thank you all for your participation. If you have any questions, you have our contact information. God bless you and have a good evening.